I want you to imagine this for a moment. A member of Congress asks, what should be an easy question? There are no plans to invade Greenland, correct? And the Pentagon refuses to say no. That is not a slip of the tongue. That is not bureaucratic caution. That is a signal. For years, Republicans have learned how to survive Donald Trump by dismissing his most extreme ideas as noise, jokes, negotiating tactics, things that would never actually happen. But Greenland has crossed a line, because this time the administration is keeping the military option open. Out loud, on the record, and suddenly, denial no longer works. This is not about a frozen island in the Arctic. It is about how a political party reacts when rhetoric hardens into possibility and when loyalty collides with alliances, law, and public will. If you want to understand how democracies drift, not through chaos, but through hesitation, stay with me. Because to grasp what's unfolding now, we need to zoom out. To understand why this matters, we have to be precise about what is actually happening. This is not a debate about whether the United States needs Greenland. It is not even a debate about strategy in the Arctic. It is a test of boundaries. Donald Trump has long blurred the line between impulse and policy. What's different now is that his administration is refusing to redraw that line. The White House is explicitly keeping military force on the table. The Pentagon is declining to deny contingency plans. And Republican leaders are being forced to respond not to a joke, but to a live option. That creates a dilemma with no easy exit. If Republicans dismiss this, they risk enabling an unprecedented provocation against a NATO ally. If they confront it, they risk breaking with a president who dominates their party. And if they stay silent, silence itself becomes a form of consent. This is why Greenland has become more than a headline. It has become a moment of reckoning for institutions, alliances, and a party caught between disbelief and responsibility. To see how we arrived here, we need to look backward. To see how we got here, we have to step back from personalities and look at patterns. For years, Republicans have learned to triage Donald Trump's statements. Some were embraced, some were ignored. Others were treated as rhetorical excess ideas too outlandish to survive contact with reality. This selective seriousness became a survival strategy. Greenland initially fit that mold. A provocative suggestion, a headline grabber, something to laugh off and move past. But that strategy only works when institutions actively close doors. This time, they didn't. Instead of clarifying limits, the administration left them open. The Pentagon spoke in contingencies. The White House spoke in options. And what once sounded absurd slowly entered the realm of the plausible. At the same time, Trump's broader posture hardened. His administration began speaking more openly about expansion and leverage in the Western Hemisphere. Power was no longer just about influence, it was about control. That shift matters because systems respond to signals. When red lines aren't drawn, they fade. And when ambiguity persists at the top, it forces everyone below to recalibrate. The result is a slow-moving crisis, one built not on action, but on normalization. And that's where the first real shock arrives. The first shock doesn't come with troops or missiles. It comes with words and with votes. As the idea of force lingers in the background, lawmakers begin doing something unusual in today's Washington. They push back, quietly at first, then on the record. Republicans and Democrats issue joint warnings, not about politics, but about danger, about recklessness, about the cost of even talking this way. One Republican calls it none of our business. Another warns of the demise of NATO. Others say the United States must treat allies as partners, not property. This is not performative outrage. This is institutional alarm, because everyone in the room understands the implication. Greenland is not just land. It is tied to Denmark, a NATO ally, and NATO is not symbolic. It is a binding promise. An attack on one is an attack on all. For the first time, Republicans are confronting a reality they hope to avoid, that preventing catastrophe may require opposing their own president. And just as that realization sets in, the pressure intensifies. because now Congress is being forced to choose. What's happening beneath the surface is not chaos. It's a system revealing its design. The United States has built enormous power into the presidency, especially when it comes to war. Congress can debate, lawmakers can warn, but unless they act, the default setting favors the commander-in-chief. That is the hidden mechanism now grinding into view. Republicans don't need to approve an invasion for it to remain possible. They only need to fail to stop it. And that asymmetry between action and inaction is what gives this moment its gravity. A single resolution could take the military option off the table, but doing so would mean drawing a clear line against Trump. And for years, the party has survived by avoiding exactly that. So the system drifts, options stay open, ambiguity becomes policy, and ambiguity in foreign affairs is never neutral. It signals uncertainty to allies and opportunity to adversaries. It erodes trust without a single shot being fired. This is how extreme outcomes become thinkable, not through conspiracy, but through institutional inertia. And now, that inertia is about to be tested by a very real vote. The second shock is sharper and far more consequential, because this is no longer theoretical. A resolution is moving toward the Senate that would block a U.S. military invasion of Greenland before it could happen. It's procedural, it's legal, and it forces clarity. Suddenly, Republicans can't hide behind disbelief. A vote means choosing, and choosing means owning the outcome. The timing makes it worse. Public opinion is not on Trump's side. Americans overwhelmingly oppose taking Greenland. Even Republican voters are largely against it. This is not a populist demand bubbling up from below. It's pressure coming from the top against the grain of the country. At the same time, the NATO implications loom larger. This would not be a strike on a distant adversary. It would be a threat against an ally. A move that in the worst case could trigger the unthinkable, a confrontation between the United States and the alliance it helped build. Republicans have blocked similar efforts before. They have declined to restrain Trump's war powers. But Greenland is different politically, legally, morally. This vote doesn't just test loyalty. It tests whether guardrails still exist, and the consequences won't be abstract, because if this line isn't drawn here, it will be felt somewhere much closer to home. Now let me bring this closer to you, because when leaders argue about power, it's easy to forget who absorbs the shock. You do. You live in a country bound by alliances that keep wars distant, not personal. You benefit from stability that makes markets predictable, borders boring, and military bases quiet. That stability doesn't come from dominance. It comes from trust. When that trust is shaken even rhetorically, costs begin to appear. Not immediately, not loudly, but steadily. Allies hedge, markets react. Uncertainty creeps into places that used to feel solid. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most Americans didn't ask for this. Polls show broad opposition to taking Greenland. Even among Republicans, support is thin. This isn't about popular will. It's about how much strain a system can take when one person keeps pushing its edges. If you care about where this leads, about whether restraint still matters, now is the moment to pay attention. Because silence isn't neutral, and indifference is not protection. What happens next won't just shape foreign policy. It will reshape how the world responds to us. When alliances weaken, the consequences don't stay contained. They travel. Greenland sits at the center of a delicate web: geography, security, credibility. What happens there wouldn't just echo in Copenhagen. It would ripple across every capital that depends on American restraint as much as American strength. NATO is built on a simple promise: collective defense. But that promise only works if members trust one another, not to turn inward, not to treat allies as leverage. When that trust erodes, countries start recalculating quietly, strategically. Some hedge their security, others look elsewhere for guarantees. Rivals watch closely, not because they care about Greenland, but because they care about precedent. If the United States is willing to threaten an ally, even rhetorically, the rules look suddenly flexible. That's how global order frays, not in dramatic collapse, but in subtle realignment. America's power has never rested on force alone. It has rested on predictability, on the belief that its commitments mean something beyond the moment. Undermine that, and the world doesn't explode. It adjusts, and once it adjusts, it doesn't adjust back easily. Which brings us to the hardest question of all. What comes next? When systems reach moments like this, there are usually only a few paths forward. Not dozens, not infinite. 3. The first is restraint. Republicans act. Congress draws a line. The military option is formally taken off the table. Alliances are reassured, and the episode becomes a warning, a reminder that institutions can still correct course when pressure mounts. The damage is real, but contained. The second is drift. No invasion happens, but no boundary is set. Statements remain ambiguous. Options remain on the table. Allies remain uneasy. This becomes the new normal, a United States that is powerful but unpredictable. Nothing breaks, yet nothing fully holds. The third is escalation. Not necessarily in Greenland, but somewhere else. Because when ambiguity becomes habit, it invites testing by presidents, by adversaries, by history. The lesson absorbed is simple. If no one stops you, you can keep going. None of these outcomes depend solely on Donald Trump. They depend on the system around him. This is the part that's easy to miss. The future isn't shaped only by dramatic decisions. It's shaped by whether institutions still believe it's their job to say no and whether they're willing to pay the price for doing so. That's why Greenland matters. Not for what it is, but for what it reveals. And that brings us to the final question, the one that lingers after the headlines fade. Let me leave you with this. The most dangerous moments in politics are not when leaders shout. They're when everyone else hesitates. No one is demanding a war over Greenland. No groundswell, no public pressure, no strategic emergency. And yet, the possibility is being kept alive not by necessity, but by refusal to close the door. History shows us this pattern again and again. Institutions don't collapse because someone breaks the rules. They collapse because others decide the rules aren't worth enforcing. Because it's easier to wait, easier to look away, easier to assume someone else will step in. This is one of those moments. What Republicans choose to do or not do will echo far beyond this episode. It will signal whether alliances still matter, whether limits still exist, whether power is something to be exercised with restraint or merely tested until it breaks. Greenland may never be invaded, but the damage is already measurable in trust, in credibility, in precedent. And the question you should keep asking is simple. If this line isn't drawn now, which one will be? If you want to keep thinking through where this path leads, stay with me. Because this story isn't over.